Villains are often an essential part in crafting a compelling narrative, as they are characters whose defeat is the goal of the main cast members of a story. Although villains aren't required for every single story, writing a story with villains in them makes the process a lot easier since they can provide obstacles for the main characters to overcome throughout the story while directly challenging the ideology of the characters we're rooting for. There's many different levels of villainy as well, with some villains wanting to do objectively horrible things that'll negatively affect the world around them, while others aren't necessarily bad people. When it comes to anime, specifically battle shonen anime, villains are rampant. There's run-of-the-mill villains, villain groups, major villains. If you're watching a battle shonen, 99% of the time there will be a clearly defined villain who often work with other villains, which establishes a villain hierarchy. When done well, villains have gone on to become some of the most iconic characters in anime, sometimes outdoing the popularity of the protagonists and being one of the main reasons people get into a show. A lot of the time in battle shonen anime, the villains present are pretty bad people. A lot of them want to destroy everything around them, start a twisted revolution, take over the world, or are just evil for the hell of it. Villain origin stories are often about a bright-eyed fella who went through a horrible tragedy that ended up radicalizing them to the point where they've become the thing they vowed to destroy. Other times, they've been grossly manipulated by a malicious third party that led them along with false promises and forced them into committing heinous acts they would have normally never even considered. When these villains are finally defeated in shonen anime, they often go down one of two paths. The first path is the villain being removed from the plane of problems, either by getting an express ticket to hell or by being sent to the Shadow Realm, where they're imprisoned for the rest of time and are only shown once every 9 million years. The other path is one of redemption, where a villain realizes their wrongdoings and is shown the light by the protagonist that inspires them to pursue a fresh start where they can discard their previous misguided prejudice. These kinds of villains usually end up helping the protagonist down the line, with some of them even going as far as joining the protagonist and helping them achieve their end goal. There's nothing wrong with an antagonist receiving a redemption arc, especially when they've been misled by the ones around them and have been indoctrinated into a harmful belief. However, in many shonen anime, when villains do end up becoming good guys, they usually lose their sauce, their edge, that aspect of them that kept the readers and watchers coming back for more, waiting to see what kind of trick they'd pull out of their seemingly never-ending bag. It makes sense why this element from previous villains is often lost when they switch sides, since they're not nearly as mysterious as before and are a lot more willing to lend a hand to the protagonist. Story beat wise, these redeemed villains usually aren't the ones who end up defeating the next villain that obstructs the protagonist's path, which means they usually end up losing in a manner that depicts them as being a lot weaker than what we had seen when they were the main antagonistic force in a previous arc. Basically, they become sorry as hell. It's great for a character to move away from violence when they had been dishing it out so frequently, but sometimes I feel a little hurt seeing a previous villain try to squabble up just to get laid out like a fraud while the main characters are powering up and winning their own battles. I watch these fights and wonder what happened to the bag I saw when they were cooking up the main character's ass, or the lack of their once high intelligence which leads them to getting folded like an omelet. What happened to the guy who planned 10 steps ahead and now he can't even outmaneuver a 15-year-old? What happened to the swagger and arrogance that they used to have in battle? Enter Bleach, an anime that's very well known for an extremely entertaining villain that everyone loved and hated at the same time. Sosuke Aizen. Bleach, unlike many other battle shonen, did not have Aizen looking sorry after he got sealed, and his presence on screen is still extremely strong even when he's not the main antagonist. Just in case y'all forgot about how Aizen used to run the scene, I'll give a rundown, because this man was truly special as a villain, especially since he consistently posed a huge threat for hundreds and hundreds of chapters and never failed to deliver. When we're first introduced to Aizen in the Soul Society arc, he's a seemingly soft, well-spoken, kind scholar, but then he's abruptly murdered, and as a viewer, your attention is shifted to Byakuya and those trying to uphold Rukia's execution. We go through this long, emotional arc filled with tons of different battles where we learn about the power system, and Ichigo manages to acquire the extremely rare ability of Bankai and ends up saving Rukia. When she's saved, you're not even thinking about Aizen as a villain, because 1, he's dead, and 2, there's no way Sexy Glasses Man could be bad. By the end of the arc, as a viewer, I'm thinking Ichigo is a prodigy that no one can stand up to. Just for Aizen to suddenly reappear and humble Ichigo in a way that's so iconic, it's being referenced to this day. We come to find out he used his Zanpakuto to deceive everyone, weak characters and captains alike, showing how much further along in power and intelligence he is. When he finally disappears to Huecamundo, you're left with a feeling of dread because the new threat of Aizen feels so insurmountable, despite seeing Ichigo grow so much within the arc. The arc finally concludes with him revealing he's the main villain, snapping his glasses and taking on a more bold, arrogant look before going to Huecamundo, and he declares he's gonna be the man who sits upon the empty throne at the top of the heavens. And that kind of claim would be pretty laughable from any other perspective, considering power that's present in the Gotei 13, but when Aizen says it after seeing everything he's done so far, you as a viewer begin to think he might really do it. In Huecamundo, Aizen manages to bitch and put under his foot extremely strong Arrancar who end up becoming major obstacles for the captains later on. He forms the Espada with the strongest of them in Huecamundo and orders them to capture Orihime. We go through so many episodes of Ichigo and Co struggling against these insanely strong Espada, and even when some of them are defeated, it never feels like a complete victory because it's shown over and over again how much stronger Aizen is compared to them and how they have no choice as hollows but to bow down to this unreadable Shinigami. And even though the Espada are so strong, they're still seen as a stepping stone to defeating Aizen. And in the final confrontation against Aizen before he's sealed in fake Karakura town, Aizen arrives and basically starts taunting all the Espada and Shinigami, baiting them into attacking them. He takes a hit from Shinji, Shunsui attacks him from a shadow, and Hitsugaya pierces Aizen in the back just for Ichigo to pull up and yell about why they're ganging up on Momo, because Kyoka Suigatsu had already been activated on all the captains. Through this arc, we see Aizen basically descend to god status in terms of power and even gain immortality, and we also learn about his past, a past that involved the hollowification experiments on citizens and Shinigami, and it becomes very clear how horrible Aizen is and the lengths he'd go to in order to achieve his own goals. We even find out that he saw Isshin and Masaki defeat one of his manufactured hollows, and he kept close tabs on Ichigo and put tons of things into motion for him to grow as a Shinigami because he was fascinated by him. He even withstands a sudden betrayal. By the time he's finally sealed up, he's sentenced to 20,000 years in Muken, the 8th and lowest level of the underground prison. And by this time, given what I had seen in other Battle Shonen anime, I thought Aizen would never play a significant role in this show again, apart from random comments here and there if Soul Society is ever facing destruction. And then we get to the final arc, the 1,000-year Blood War, and we're introduced to Yhwach, a villain that seems so impossible to defeat because he can basically see through anything. And this man, this leader of an entire race that's looking for vengeance, goes out of his way to meet Aizen, who identifies him as the Quincy King. He offers Aizen a spot in the Wandenreich as a special war power, and Aizen refuses him despite being bound, stating that it's absurd a Quincy King would follow the path of a Shinigami. Mind you, Yhwach is by far the strongest character we've seen so far and literally wants to destroy Soul Society. But this man says he sees Aizen as a threat, and Yhwach, this character who we think can see through everything, leaves his discussion with Aizen, and we come to find out that he was talking to a Kyoka Suigatsu illusion of Aizen, and Aizen had altered his perception of time while sitting in a chair with everything restrained. After the Soul King perishes, Shunsui, the new head captain of the Gote 13, visits Aizen and unlocks the seal over Aizen's mouth. And it's kind of terrifying to watch because you know what Aizen's capable of, and you begin wondering if Soul Society is gonna have to deal with both Aizen and Yuha. The keys are stored in Shunsui's own body. That's how dangerous Aizen is. Shunsui, the head captain, has to treat approaching Aizen with so much care. Aizen's reintroduced looking down at Shunsui, showing how terrifying he truly is. Aizen agrees to help the Shinigami, not because he's suddenly on their side and wants everyone in the society to flourish, but because he doesn't want Yuha's plan to come into fruition. Despite offering help, he never really feels like a good guy, and whenever he speaks or tries to move, there's a lingering feeling in the back of your mind wondering if he'll suddenly give up this facade and go back to being the villain we know him to be. Even without getting all of his restraints removed, Aizen pulls up to the field as Soul Palace is crumbling, still in a chair, and his Reiatsu alone crushes the black creatures pouring into Serete. Even when facing sheer doom and destruction, Shunsui refuses to undo 3 of Aizen's seals because he knows he can destroy the monsters while being in a chair. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the manga. After Yhwach kills God and establishes himself as the supreme force in all of the realms, Aizen still welcomes the supreme stash to his Soul Society. When Aizen's restraints are finally broken, he isn't quaking in his boots or running for the hills. In fact, he's asking for the smoke because he's Aizen, the man who still desires to stand atop the heavens, not Aizen, the guy who simply wants to stay alive. Even though he's helping Ichigo defeat Yhwach, Aizen still has the sauce, as he managed to dupe Yhwach, the Almighty, someone who seemed impossible to outmaneuver and overcome. Yet Aizen somehow managed to fool him into thinking he stabbed Ichigo when it was Aizen all along. During all of this time, you're never thinking Aizen's suddenly a pawn of Ichigo. He's still his own independent antagonistic force, and he carries such insane screen presence even when he's restrained, even when he's been stabbed through, even when he's face to face with the strongest character we've seen so far. I believe Aizen works so well as a previous villain that's still terrifying when he's not the main focus because of how Kubo handles gray morality in Bleach and how good and bad isn't portrayed as black and white at all. The Quincy were a race who were brutally slaughtered by the old Gote 13, who were unhinged to say the least. The current Gote 13 themselves aren't exactly good people. They're all kind of psychotic and are clearly kept as captains because of their merit in battle. They've committed war crimes, constantly do questionable things, and not all of them, especially Squad Zero, operate with the common man's best interests in mind. Due to this, when Aizen does decide to help, he's not suddenly good. He's operating exactly in the way Aizen we know would operate in these circumstances if he was still the main villain, and that's one of the main reasons he's so compelling, terrifying, and swagalicious.